Hello, you're listening to the Career Changemaker podcast. Having the courage to leave a career that you have worked hard to build and try something else can be tough. So in each episode, we dive into key career change strategies so that you have a clear understanding of what is required to transition into a new role or a new industry without feeling like you have to start at the bottom or have to take a massive pay cut, because ain't nobody got time for that. If you are ready for frank and honest discussions about how to become a career change maker, keep listening. I'm your host, lawyer turned career strategist and executive coach, Janine Esbrand. Hello, and welcome to the show. We are having a candid discussion today about neurodiversity and particularly about ADHD. I've seen so many posts, I've heard so many conversations relating to people being diagnosed with ADHD as adults, and I've had my own recent diagnosis that was illuminating and game-changing in so many ways. And I think it's important for us to dive into this conversation. So I have brought on an incredible guest who is an expert in this area, who's going to be breaking down the ins and the outs and really highlighting the fact that any type of neurodiversity essentially means that your brain functions in a non-typical way, and when you understand yourself better, you're able to make sure that you are aligning yourself to the right environment and the right types of roles so that you can absolutely thrive and that you can leverage some of your superpowers where you are. The problem comes where there's misalignment, and so the increased level of awareness can just really help you if you feel like you've been struggling to find your place or trying to figure out where it is you really need to be next in your career. This conversation can really help. So let's dive into my conversation with Alex Gilbert. Hey, Alex, I am beyond excited to interview you today. So before we dive into all the good stuff, could you introduce yourself and tell the audience a bit about you?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I am in the States, so I feel like if you didn't get that from my accent, that should be pretty obvious that I'm in the States. But I am dyslexic and have ADHD, and I was really privileged to be diagnosed at 8 years old, which is a rarity, which I'm coming to realize how rare it was to be diagnosed. But I had immense privilege in having resources all the way through college. And when I started working, none of those resources really exist. None of that support system really existed. And I was really struggling with my physical and mental health because it was just so hard. I didn't know how to navigate the workplace. I didn't know how to navigate those conversations. And even though I had been learning to advocate for myself in the school setting, I had even created a mentor retention program and taught other students how to advocate for themselves in college. It's apples and oranges. And so the pandemic hit. I was laid off from my job due to COVID. And I had this dream since I was 16 years old to find a way to support other adults who have a learning disability or ADHD to really see all that they were capable of, which is why my company is called Capable Consulting, because I wanted people to know that just because they had these disabilities didn't mean that they didn't have skills that should be seen as amazing and wonderful and valued. And so I am just so excited to talk about so many different transitions that people are making in their careers and how we can find jobs that really suit their needs so that we can really thrive and not just survive.
Oh, I absolutely love this. And this topic, when we first connected about potentially having you on the show, like it is near and dear to my heart, because I have been a full-time entrepreneur for nearly 2 years now. And it's only really since becoming a full-time entrepreneur and dealing with the challenges of being outside of the workplace where there is structure and there is guidance around what I should be doing when, that I started to be like, why is it that certain things are so hard for me to stick to? And why have I got all these plans, but I can never follow through? And I was having a conversation with my therapist and she was just like, has anyone ever told you might have ADHD? And I was like, no, say more.
Right. It's not just you. These are not just characteristics of you. We used to say that about my sister, like, oh, she was on her own time. And I was like, well, or it's something else. But
Right.
actually, it's really common for people who have a learning disability or who have ADHD to be in that entrepreneurial field, because sometimes the structure is just butting against them in all the wrong ways, and they have a really hard time with the type of structure that was set up in those workplaces. So they were like, I'm done. I'm doing this myself. And that's why so many of us are, with learning disabilities and ADHD in our own spaces.
Yeah, but it's so interesting because for me, I didn't struggle in the workplace, but it didn't, I wasn't able to identify, because I guess I found ways to navigate my way through. And then it's only now when I'm like, okay, there are certain things that are challenging. And now I need to figure out how we work that out. So I love that you were saying before about helping people to figure out, like, what are their superpowers? Like, what are the things that make them unique? They can leverage, because the more and more I've dug into, okay, how does my brain actually work? I recognize that, I may not be the best person at finishing things. Like, I may start a project and not be able to follow through, but I can get team members to support me with that. But what I know that I'm brilliant at is being able to connect the dots in ways that other people can't. And like, my brain is working so fast that like a client can be sharing with me their challenge, and I'm like, oh, so you need to do, and they're like, oh my gosh, I never did it like that.
How did you do that? Like, How did you connect the dots? Yeah, I know. That is one of those amazing strengths that people have that they don't realize doesn't come naturally to other people. Yeah. And that problem solving, that ability to be able to see the big picture and the little details all at once is an amazing strength. And that's why so many of us are in these problem solving modes. It's also why so many of us watch TV shows, and within the first 5 minutes, you know exactly how the plot's going to go. Yeah. Like, well, it can only go this way. But we get bored with whatever show or movie we're watching, because we're like, just get there. But that's also why people get annoyed being in a lot of different workplaces when they don't get to use those skills to say, like, move to the side. I've got this. I want to be able to solve this problem efficiently. And we get frustrated when people are not doing it as efficiently because we can see it so clearly and they can't. But there's a number of skills that we have, but when we're in the wrong environments, in the wrong type of structure for us that don't really allow us to kind of like push people to the side a little bit and say, like, let me run with this, we get bored, we get frustrated, and then we don't follow through with things nearly as much because we find it to be inefficient, and I'm just going to say stupid. Just like, I don't want to do this job anymore, and you get frustrated, and then people get annoyed at you. Like, why don't you follow through? And it's hard to motivate yourself to do something that you have no stake in.
Yes. Okay, so let's back up a little bit, because there may be people listening being like, okay, they're talking about ADHD. Like, how do you even know if that's something you need to look into? Like, I know that it shows up differently for a lot of people. Yes. And there's a spectrum. Like, there's some people who like have a few elements that, like, there's certain elements of your executive function that isn't working in the way that mainstream it might work, to like most people. And there's some people that struggle with other areas. So what are some of the key things that you would say are indicators or examples of ADHD showing up?
Sure. So as you said, it shows up differently for a lot of different people. I think that's why so many women are being diagnosed late, is because there are really 3 types of ADHD. One is inattentive, which is usually what a lot of women are diagnosed with. It's really hard to see because you can't see someone who's maybe looks like they're paying attention to the conversation, but absolutely they're not there. They're in their own world, going in a million miles a minute, potentially, or not at all, just spaced out. And a lot of the times in school, people would say, okay, well, they're just spacey, but they're smart and they're driven and they can seemingly figure things out. Usually hyperactive is what you think of when you think of a hyperactive boy in class who's disrupting the teacher and driving everybody crazy. But usually in girls and in women, it's someone who's excessively talking, just constantly their mind is going and they are talking a million miles a minute. I'm from New York, and people would say, oh, that's just a New Yorker, but it's also like, I have ADHD. Then there's the combined type, which is what I have. And that is when you can be inattentive and hyperactive kind of at the same time, where you are sitting there, as I was saying before, you're sitting there, it looks like you're spaced out, but actually I've just run through 14 different to-do lists and I can go in all these different directions, but I'm kind of not moving at the same time. So it could show up in a lot of different ways. And as I was saying, women are more likely to be diagnosed late in life. And a lot of the times people are coming to me after their kids have been diagnosed, because all of a sudden they're realizing, oh, these traits are not just characteristics. This is actually a disability. And women are usually the kind of people who are told, oh, well, you have to sit up straight or you can stop talking, or she's just a chatty Cathy, and everything gets pushed off. And we mask for it. And we think there's nothing wrong with us because someone would have diagnosed me by now if there was something wrong. And that's where a lot of the layers of anxiety and depression really kind of seep in and overlap a lot with people who have these kinds of disabilities. So a lot of the time people tell me they were diagnosed with anxiety or depression, or they were even diagnosed with bipolar. And really that could be true in addition to ADHD, but it could be a symptom of masking for having ADHD and not being diagnosed.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Because, I guess sometimes people are walking around either not really recognizing what's going on with their brain or they are misdiagnosing what is going on.
Exactly.
And I think like when you feel as though the way that I was describing it before I started therapy was that I'm fine, like I'm functioning, but I don't feel well. Like not like I don't feel well in the sense of like my nose is runny or like my head hurts but like just generally like my brain, I just don't feel well. Like there's a on, and I'm not quite sure. And so but
it's interesting that you even knew that well wasn't what you were feeling.
Yes.
Because a lot of people don't know that there could be something that they could feel that's different. Like I remember I was graduating from college, and my ex-boyfriend from college, I remember we were talking, it was like one of the last days before we were graduating. I'm now done with all my classes. I'm done with all of my finals. I already had a job potential of what I was going to be doing that summer. I, in theory, had nothing to think about. And I was like, so what are you thinking about? And he goes, nothing. I was like, no. But like, you're thinking of other things. And he was like, no, I'm thinking about nothing. I'm like, how? Like, I didn't know that somebody could seriously just think of nothing. He's like, what do you have to think about or worry about? I was like, it doesn't matter if I have something to think about or worry about. I will find something. I will find something to keep stimulating myself. So having those realizations that other people don't think this way or don't mention this way. The fact that you actually knew you didn't feel well is really interesting.
Well, to the point about recognizing that other people can think about nothing. Like I experienced that when I first met my husband, and I would go to his house and we would just be chilling out and he'd be lying down on the bed. And I'm like, your eyes are closed. Are you going to sleep? He's like, no, I'm not going to sleep. It's like 7 p.m. I'm just chilling. Okay, but what are you doing? He's like, I'm just chilling. Like, I'm just relaxing. I'm like, but your eyes are closed.
Right.
Like, yeah. I'm like, but what are you thinking about? He's like, nothing, like you said, right?
Right.
And I'm like, opening his eyes with my hands and being like,
what? What is that like?
Now, what are you thinking about? Like,
right.
And he's like, I'm not thinking about anything. And I'm just like,
I'm thinking about how I'd like you to stop asking me what I'm thinking about. Like, that's basically the response. Right.
So yeah, it is interesting to recognize that, other people operate in a different way. And I think for me, when I was saying I don't feel well, I just was like, I'm feeling quite emotional. I'm feeling quite overwhelmed. And that isn't normal for me not to be able to like bounce back and like catch what I'm feeling and like rationalize it and then move on. And so because I was stuck in a loop with that, I was like, this is foreign to me. So like, what is actually going on?
Yeah.
And that coincided with like making the transition into like full-time entrepreneurship and then really figuring out what does this actually look like now that I'm no longer a lawyer, I've got a new identity, like what does that actually mean? And I think it was that transition that then made me be like, okay, what's happening?
Yeah. I talk to people about all different types of transitions, whether it's transitions into a new job or transition into parenthood. For example, I have an 8-month-old. There are so many changes that happen, and it's really easy to get caught up in all of those different places and say, like, well, where am I? What is happening? And is this even the right transition for me? Did I take the steps that I needed to make sure that I was protecting myself mentally and physically to help me succeed in whatever transition you're making? And that transition for careers is really hard for someone who has ADHD or a learning disability, because about 60% of people who have a learning disability or ADHD get fired from their jobs. We were talking earlier about how they get bored. They don't necessarily follow through. They get reprimanded for taking longer, for doing things. They don't necessarily know they have the disability in the first place, so they don't advocate for what they need. It's really hard to conceptualize all of that. But another part of having ADHD in particular is that we tend to be really impulsive. And so we just say, I quit. I'm moving on to something else. And then they find the exact same job over and over again. So it's not really a transition. You've just found a new place to park your stuff.
Yeah.
And nothing changed. And so what I really try and help people with as they're transitioning to a new career or transitioning in some capacity of their life is, what do you need? What does support look like? What do you want? Because you might be good at a lot of things, and just because you've been using those skills in this type of field doesn't mean you want to keep doing this type of job in this type of field. So I really try and help people unpack a lot of that and end up in the right environment for them, to give them the place to really thrive in their skill set. And sometimes it's for the first time.
Yeah.
And that is really rewarding to be able to do for people.
Yeah, I love that. Susie, we've got so many synergies because when I'm coaching clients, it is really like taking that inside out approach so that they understand themselves and put themselves in an environment that is aligned. Because most of the time, people will just hop around and do what seems good, what looks good. But then if you're not spending the time, and that is really about slowing down enough to identify, like, what do I need to be doing that's going to light me up and that aligns with my personality and aligns with all of my quirks and that appreciates who I am for what I can bring to the table, so that you're able to make more impact. And I don't think people are taught, well, they aren't taught that approach to like career choices and career development. And so I think it's so important that there are opportunities for people to go through that process with someone who can guide them, whether that be on the, from the perspective that you're talking about in terms of, okay, you may have neurodivergence and you might need to figure out like what you need so that you can show up in the best way, or just from a career perspective, like I help people, like, how are you aligning all the different aspects of you, your strengths, your interests, all of that, to make sure that you're in a place where you get to exercise those things and leverage them.
And it's really similar to what I'm doing as well. It's just the people who I work with have such unique skills.
Yes.
And they're usually in jobs that require a lot of executive functioning tasks that are really based on their weaknesses. And so they lose that sense of confidence that they can't do it because, other people can. And it's really, really frustrating. And so I try and help people feel a little more in the driver's seat when it comes to that, so that they can understand that they have these skills and they should be valued in different places to do different things and feel better.
Yeah, I love that. So if someone is like, okay, I'm listening to you ladies talk and this sounds like this could be me, like I need to explore this. What are like the first few steps that you would say to someone who is thinking that maybe they do have some kind of neurodivergence, or like they think it's ADHD, or they think that there might be something that's not quite clicking for them? What steps should they take?
I think this is the most common question I get is like, now what?
Yeah.
And the truth is, it's really going to depend on the person itself. Sometimes the first conversation is with a therapist if you have one that you are already talking to and you trust. Sometimes it's with a doctor. Sometimes it's with a coach. Sometimes it's finding a friend potentially that also just got diagnosed that you can connect with, or it really, there is no exact right step. And that's actually how I coach people too, is I like to see this as best principles versus best practices, because best practices assumes everyone can do the exact same thing and end up with the same results, which often doesn't work, versus best principles, meaning we have the same goal in mind, but how we get there is not necessarily going to look the same for you as it does for somebody else.
Yeah.
The first step for some of my clients was a therapist. The first step for some of my clients was a doctor. The first step for some of my clients was working with a coach to manage their day-to-day struggles, and they went from there. Mm-hmm. Whatever you're doing to move forward is moving forward, and that's the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So good. So if you think about your journey and your transition and like where you are now with being able to do something, like you mentioned that you've always wanted to be able to support other people. What advice would you give to someone who is in that space where they're like, okay, I actually want to transition in a way where I feel like I'm making the most impact in the work that I'm doing? What advice would you give based on your experience?
Are you saying like leaving the job entirely?
Yeah, whether it be leaving the job, reimagining the job, or like just recognizing that how you're showing up and what you're doing right now is not working at a transition.
The way you asked it makes me think that this person underlyingly would like to leave because they are trying to fit a round peg into a square hole and trying to make whatever they were in maybe for a few years still work, but it's really not the place for them anymore. Yes. So I'm going to say that this is the kind of person who actually does want to leave, but doesn't know how. And I would say one of the things that I like to do is help people pull out characteristics of their strengths and figure out what 5 words can you describe about your strengths. And one of the fun ways that I actually do this is, I'm giving away the farm here, but I ask people what is their favorite and least favorite game, because everything about games tells me how you think and how you learn and how you organize and what's your motivation and what are the things that really deter you from playing these games. And if you think about a game, and you can do this too, if you think about a game that you love to play and that you're really good at, what skills do you need to play those, and why do you keep playing them? And what is the game that you hate the most, and why do you hate playing them? So, for example, for me, I love the game Tetris. I'm such a millennial, but I love the game Tetris. And that has everything to do with seeing the big picture and the little details, knowing what's coming, how can I organize, how can I shuffle things, how can I problem solve quickly. And the more I do it, the better I am. That was what I thrived in a lot of my jobs, was how can I put things into place and constantly keep them moving. I hated Pac-Man, and Pac-Man was everything I struggled with in every workplace, of the anticipation and not having a chance to actually think, because I didn't know what direction any of those little ghosts were coming from, how they were going to get me, what I could do to move quickly. I crumbled every single time. And if you can pull apart those games, it's a really great way to figure out what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. And if you can pull out 5 key words about those strengths, start searching and really keep it very, very, very broad. If one of the words was organization, what comes up? Is it organizations, or is it a job that you organize events? Is it a job that you're organizing platforms and people? You don't know what's going to come up, and you don't know what's out there, and you likely haven't searched in a while for something that actually fits those characteristics.
Oh my gosh, Alex, my mind is so blown with the choose a game.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, my favorite games are Articulate.
I don't know how to play that, but you can tell me.
It's basically a game where you have a team and you choose a pack of cards and you have a timer and you have to describe the word on the card without saying the word.
Oh, okay. There's a lot of similarities to that.
Right? Yeah. So that means you have to think quickly and you have to be able to like jump around in your mind and be like, oh, this relates to this. So because it relates to this, I'm going to explain it like that. So I get to use that whole impulsive, like connect the dots thing. And I love it.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a coach.
What did you just do right now?
Like make
on that game. Think of the skills of that game versus what you do right now.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
That's why you love it. You love being able to talk to people. You love being able to communicate and help them like connect the dots. You love getting to think impulsively and inspire other people to get excited about something. That is what you do for a career. That's what I try and get out of people. You get so excited to talk about something like that in particular.
Yeah.
You don't get excited to talk about the game that you hate. And it's probably the skills that you lacked in a previous job.
Oh, I've never thought about breaking it down in that way. This is beautiful.
It's so much more fun. It's like, I don't want to take a quiz. What about me? I want to say, like, tell me something you loved.
Oh yeah, this is so good. And the games I don't like playing, like, I don't like playing imaginary games with my kids. Like when they're like, we pretend, like, let's play, I don't know, like play shopkeepers and stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll pretend to be the shopkeeper.
It's too vague, which is actually what you said you struggle with in doing your job right now. There's no structure.
Right.
It's too vague. And so you can't navigate what the rules are because there are no rules.
I don't like that.
And when you are struggling as an entrepreneur, you're the one setting the rules. So you have to set the rules and then follow them. And that just is enough.
Right. So basically, this started as a podcast recording and has turned into a coaching session. Thank you so much.
I mean, that's kind of how a lot of these go. But that's what I like to do, to help people figure out what their strengths are, what are the things that they really struggle with. Because again, if you didn't think about it in that aspect, you wouldn't know to start looking for a job and think, I'm going to end up in the same place, because they look like they might look different in a different place, but the same struggles are still there.
Yeah, 100%. This is so good. I love this. Thank you. Thank you for dropping the gems.
I'm glad I could do that.
Yeah. So if people want to learn more about what it is that you do and your approach and all of that, like, where's the best place for them to go?
So I have a few courses specifically on helping people with job transitions, where I do very similar to what I just did. But everything can be found on my website, which is capableconsulting.com. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at I am capable, CAPE, or on Facebook and LinkedIn, it's Capable Consulting, again, CAPE. I have courses that help with job transitions. I work in strategy sessions, similar to what we just did, on how to help people find the right job for them with more one-on-one approach. And I also have a community where I'm supporting other adults who have learning disabilities or ADHD, so you can connect to people. I do a live coaching session once a month. I bring in different experts to talk about different topics you might be struggling with. And I do something called a virtual coffee shop, where we are body doubling and making sure we are holding each other accountable to actually finish our work. So lots of things to do, lots of ways to support you. Just come find me.
Yes. Oh, so good. So I'm going to put all of your links in the show notes. Perfect. My final before we wrap up is, yes, I normally ask guests to share whether it is a mantra, a saying, a quote that they enjoy, they like, or they live by. Would you like to share one with us?
It's funny you just asked that, because I say this to my clients all the time. There is a very famous children's book called I'm Going on a Bear Hunt, and I actually just read it to my daughter this morning. And one of the things that I love the most about this book is that they say on every page, I'm not scared, but I can't get over it, I can't go under it. I got to go through it. And a lot of the times we are faced with challenges that we're trying to push down or we're trying to put away. And the only way to actually manage it is to go through it. So if you are struggling in any way, we have to go through it, and you can do it with the support that you need. And that's what I would say is the takeaway message here.
Oh, beautiful. That's so wise.
Thank you.
That's so wise.
Yeah. I was explaining to my husband what I thought the key element of that book is. And he was like, that's deep. And I was like, you know what? It is. So I read it to her all the time.
Oh, I love it. Now that's making me want to go read it to my kids. I have it.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Wonderful chatting to you. And I'll share the links and we'll speak again very soon, hopefully.
I can't wait. All right.
Thanks. I hope you found that insightful, especially the part where Alex essentially started coaching me, and I learned a lot about the relationship between the games that I like to play and the career that I now enjoy. I hope you've been able to connect some dots for yourself. And if you think that you may be neurodivergent, maybe that's something that you need to look into more. If there's things that we talked about that resonate with you, then perhaps that can provide an explanation for you around why you do things, how you do things. But ultimately, I hope the biggest takeaway for you is that there is a space for you to show up in the workplace that is aligned with who you are as a person and the strengths that you have and where you can add the most value. If you haven't found it already, it's out there. So it's about paying attention to that and seeking that transition. All right, that's all from us today. We'll be back again very, very soon with another awesome career conversation. Until then, look after yourself and keep moving towards your career goals. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, then I want to remind you that caring is sharing. Share this episode out with somebody else and head over to your podcast app to leave us a rating and review. For every rating and review that you leave, it helps us reach more people. It helps more people find the show. So I'd appreciate it if you go and do that right now. Thank you so much.